Expedition 33 might be one of the most important RPG releases in years, and no, that's not an exaggeration. The feeling I experienced about a decade ago when entering Skellige and Novigrad and The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt for the first time is a similar feeling I had when traversing the war-torn environments of Lumiere. It's a high-fidelity, turn-based RPG with deep narrative roots, stylish, surrealist art direction, exquisite music, and combat that feels tactile despite being turn-based. It's everything AAA publishers claim players no longer want. They've conditioned us to believe that this is not what we want, yet it instantly clicked with gamers because it respected the player's time and intelligence. It also just constantly surprised and delighted with huge WTF moments and reveals. It's not very often I play a game and just know this is going to be an all-time experience. That's Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and I do take some pride in being one of the few that highlighted Expedition 33 months ago as an example of how this games industry is changing for the better. Still, I don't think anyone envisioned or expected something this masterful from a first-time studio. It's a game that very much so should not exist, but it does represent the talent and politics that are plaguing so much of the AAA games industry. The creativity and magic is still there in this industry. It is beating so many stories, so many experiences, so many ideas being flushed down the creative drain due to the AAA games industry's modern playbook of risk aversion and chasing trends. The bold vision we see from iconic studios these days is often dabbling in a live service concept they have no business touching, and yet they spend nearly a decade fucking around and finding out with it. It's a repetitive cycle, and one that has made me appreciate what smaller dev teams are building and accomplishing. I've already talked about extensively in the past about former BioWare veterans working on the ambitious Exodus, a spiritual successor of sorts to Mass Effect. The former Witcher 3 director and other CD Projekt Red veterans are working on the Blood of Dawnwalker, very Witcher 3-esque, and even this year, besides Expedition 33, we've seen surprise smash hits like Drug Dealing Schedule 1 coming from a single developer, Blueprints, an excellent puzzle game also from a single developer's creative vision. Last year there was Balatro, and another game that will be actually in the Game of the Year conversation later this year, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, isn't this massive behemoth of a development empire. The developer Warhorse certainly employs a few hundred, but they made the game for less than $50 million. You compare that to the thousands of people working on AAA franchises like Call of Duty or Spider-Man or Dragon Age or Assassin's Creed, with budgets in the hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars and dev cycles that are taking longer than ever before. The AAA games industry is broken, and games like Expedition 33 are showcasing a different path forward. The tools and tech are here now. The need to have this massive organization and structure isn't what's needed anymore. Creatives need to be empowered, and that just isn't happening, or going to happen with the C-suite Wall Street executives running these companies right now. The AAA industry will continue to buckle under its own weight, tripping over bloated development cycles, making tone-deaf design decisions, and running on a mission to delight the biggest modern audience possible, which in turn delights no one. And certainly there will be some successes. Grand Theft Auto 6 and its animated couches, it will probably be a must-play with the most innovative of innovative design that we've seen. But that path is one exclusive to Rockstar Games, a high that so many are chasing and not even getting close to reaching. It's why after Baldur's Gate 3 released, and we saw panic from the industry about it setting a new standard, I genuinely was confused. Larian didn't set a new standard, they just reintroduced an old one, which was focused on player freedom and meaningful choice, aspects that so many big-name studios from Bethesda to BioWare have struggled with in these modern times. It's fair in my mind to question the process of these once mighty giants and whether or not the industry is broken, and I believe a game like Expedition 33 does in fact prove it is. At the very least, some within this industry are understanding the importance of this moment and why a game like Expedition 33 truly can flip this games industry on its head. Ex-PlayStation boss Shuhei Yoshida earlier in the month explained that the $50 Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is the perfect balance of AAA ambition, AA budget, and independent vision. this is the path the industry should be pursuing. And he further added, I hope the game gets the success it deserves because it's time for AA games to regain their market share. Unfortunately, that success has happened. 33 days, 3.3 million in sales. I don't believe that this includes Game Pass numbers, but for everybody involved, Sandfall Interactive, Kepler, which is the publisher overseeing all of this has just been a massive success story, and they're already talking about future plans for, more games, and hopefully this is going to represent a model that not necessarily the AAA games industry, but indie and smaller studios are following, because this perfectly exemplifies, I think, a healthy industry that a lot of us want to personally see. And like I said, it's not just the fact that the game, has been a massive success in terms of sales, it's also the fact that people are absolutely loving it. I talked about, my impressions earlier on in the video, saying that I think it's masterful. I think it's one of the best games I've played in years, but that's also reflected on places like Metacritic, in which you have scores of like 9.8 on PC, 9.7 on consoles, and truly everybody who experiences this just walks away with WTF moment. Like, it's just, you're overloaded with how amazing this game truly is in terms of its performances, in terms of its gameplay, in terms of its build potential. There's just so much here to compliment. And while you do see that in terms of sales and player reviews, it's also noticeable in a place like Steam, in which people are going out of their way to buy this game, because this is an experience that people want to have in their catalog. It's not a game that some people, especially myself, I don't want to just rent it. This is a game that I want to have on the wall, have a physical copy, and play it, whenever I can. And on Steam right now, a month after launch, it's still around 55,000 players. That is beyond impressive, especially for a game that is available on Game Pass. And we've seen other massive franchises like Doom struggling to engage any players. And even you can look to another massive release from Ubisoft, Assassin's Creed Shadows, barely even reached those heights, and that's a massive franchise. So I think the success that we are seeing with Expedition 33, it's just unprecedented, and we rarely see that. And it's, again, it just represents a path forward that really hasn't been talked about enough. But look, the fundamental formula, the actual game style of Expedition 33 isn't this, massive foreign concept that's impossible to create. This has been there. This is something that a lot of other publishers could have engaged with. And the main thing what people are talking about is Square Enix. Analysts have actually brought this up. Square Enix is probably kicking itself seeing the success of realistic turn-based JRPG Expedition 33, analysts say, after being reticent to do it with the Final Fantasy series. If you asked Final Fantasy fans from the late 90s, early 2000s what the ideal version of a JRPG should look like, it'd be something like this. And I think that really just says a lot about the stagnation in creativity and the fact that so much of this industry is so scared about taking risks. And the only risks that we are seeing is, it truly is, chasing trends, trying to find a microtransaction fountain. That is just what we've become accustomed to. And that's why I do think, like I said, the last couple of years in terms of RPGs and the focus so many of them have, it just doesn't feel like it's focused on what actually, players want. It's focused on the modern audience and trying to make a game that is as open and friendly to everybody, but at the same time, we've talked extensively about how that hurts the main audience and how that hurts the overall experience, because when you're trying to satisfy everybody, you're not going to satisfy anyone. And that's why I think, like, the controversy surrounding Dragon Age the Veilguard, this just continues to boil over. We continue to hear from individuals that are part of the development, lashing out at gamers, lashing out at players, not understanding why it was so divisive, but it really is quite clear why it was. We actually heard recently from the Dragon Age the Veilguard actress, they defended the game, saying people were attacking the game before it was released. You know why? Because people looked at the gameplay, looked at the trailers, looked at the art direction, and saw that this wasn't Dragon Age. And that's something that so many of us are saying with so many of these core franchises, and they're just monstrosities of what they used to be. The complexity, what made them special are no longer there. They've been rooted out with just a lot of nonsense, and that's really what this AAA games industry has become known for. And that's why people have lashed out even before launch with BioWare, because they knew what was coming, and they ended up being right. But this specific actress, they played the female Inquisitor in Dragon Age Inquisition and Veilguard, and they spoke to IGN about Veilguard, and they said they were absolutely devastated that the game didn't sell as well as expected and received so much backlash, despite most critics' reviews ranging from quite good to excellent. But the problem is, those critic reviews, they were very controlled by Electronic Arts, the publisher, and if you actually looked at user reviews, they were quite mixed. If you go on Steam, it's like a 70 or so. That's not great, and a lot of people did not buy the game. So look, that's the fundamental issue with all of this. You can point to some of the critic reviews, but the core audience, they did not show up because they were not interested in this product that looked like it was very divorced from what Dragon Age used to be known for. But this actor did say, I also think a lot of people kind of wanted to see it fail or wanted to see BioWare fail, either because they're just really bad people on the internet, of which there are unfortunately many, as we have discovered. And that's a cop-out response, and that doesn't understand or really try to dive into why people were dissatisfied with this new Dragon Age entry and why people were really worried for the last couple of years with BioWare, period, because it's not like Dragon Age the Veilguard came out of the middle of nowhere. We had Anthem, we had Mass Effect Andromeda. A lot of us already saw the fears, a lot of us already saw the concerns, and then the marketing and everything the developers were saying, it just did not sound appealing. And then finally, when release day came, it just confirmed all of our suspicions. And that's not exclusive just to this franchise. This is what we are seeing with so many RPGs, so many games in general. And to piggyback on that, we actually did hear again from another former BioWare developer, Dragon Age writer David Gator. He talked about Expedition 33 and also Baldur's Gate 3, some of the most notable RPGs in the last couple of years, some of the most successful, and he says they prove what's possible when a game is given time to cook. And the problem is associating that with Dragon Age the Veilguard, that's just ridiculous, because that game had 8, 9, 10 years of development. That was not the core problem with the game. It was the fact that it was just divorced from what players wanted. It was a poor imitation of a new Dragon Age game. Now, while that headline with Gator's remarks are a little bit out there, his actual extensive comments do kind of make a little bit more sense. He says, I think there's such a thing as expanding the audience as opposed to treating the audience as this finite number of people, right? And I think that's what Expedition 33 really does. I think it manages to take the elements of JRPGs, and I don't think it's going to it's doing a lot of new things, honestly. It's taking a number of more recent trends and kind of bundling them in an interesting way that I think makes it very accessible to people who normally wouldn't play JRPGs, which, yeah, that includes myself. And he said the successes of Clair Obscur and Baldur's Gate 3 also demonstrates what's possible when a game is given time to cook. Baldur's Gate 3 had an extended and very front-facing early access period, while Clair Obscur director Guillermo Brochet said earlier in May that it would have taken years to get the project approved at his former company Ubisoft. And again, that's all the bureaucracy, that's just a lot of the politics that is going on at a company like Ubisoft, which employs like 13,000 people, and that gets in the way of making great games. And that's why we keep getting open world nonsense from, Assassin's Creed, and which is really regressed in so many regards into what the franchise used to be known for. They are hurting. The creativity has stagnated at that company, and it's not going to get better because fundamentally they aren't changing how they're making games. Publishers want mass appeal, Gator said. They want to feel comfortable, de-risk it by imagining how the appeal translates to many different kinds of audiences, which I think often kind of ends up diluting that very specific thing a game can do. Like I said, what Baldur's Gate 3 did and what Expedition does is, yes, they appeal very, very strongly to that one audience, but it's so strong that it ends up growing that audience, which that part of that statement is absolutely true. And he even furthermore said some other remarks, which I think it just opens up a little bit more about what these AAA executives are thinking and how broken this industry has become. Dragon Age creator David Gator says EA execs thought BioWare fans would eat whatever slop they were given, since the nerds in the cave would always show up for an RPG because it was an RPG, which is just... Again, Android Wilson, the executives running these companies, these people truly are out of touch. Per Gator, EA bosses used to refer to RPG stalwarts as living in the cave. They'd be in the nervcade. You see where the nerds lived, you made an RPG, and the nerds in the cave would always show up for an RPG because it was an RPG. With EA bosses convinced that the nerve cave would spill out its denizens to any game with BioWare in the box, their philosophy became that you didn't have to try and appeal to them. You had to worry about the people who weren't in the cave, which was the audience we actually wanted, which was much larger. And that's an indictment on this industry. This isn't just exclusive to Dragon Age. You've seen this with the Elder Scrolls, you've seen this with Fallout, and so many other franchises. They start off very niche, there's a core audience there that shows up, and then over time new entries come about, and they try to expand it by making gameplay mechanics and maybe the story more open to a wider audience, but at the same time that just ruins the complexity and ruins these franchises. And that's why we end up with games like Dragon Dragon Age, the Veilguard, even something like Starfield. And it's blasphemous in the eyes of fans of these franchises or iconic studios. And that is why a game like Clair Obscur Expedition 33 isn't going to happen at Ubisoft or Electronic Arts or Rockstar Games or wherever. It has to happen at an indie studio, it has to start up like Sandfall Interactive. And one of the lead developers, the director, actually explained this. He said projects like these with new IPs, original stories, completely original characters are super hard to push through in a big company. There are a lot of approval steps, and in general, in big structures, you already have proven yourself and be pretty high up in the hierarchy just to have a chance at pitching this kind of project. For me, a project like this would have taken 25 years to make in a big company, and I don't have that much patience. We all wanted to do things our own way and really create an atmosphere. That's what this game is, creating a vibe. And like I said, the fact that Expedition 33 even exists is an achievement in of itself. Everything about this game's development is truly extraordinary. Like I said, the reason why this project even began was because Guillemot Brochet, the director, he was bored at his job at Ubisoft and wanted to do something different. Working for French gaming giant Ubisoft at the time, he had an idea for his own project, a role-playing game inspired by one of his childhood favorites, the classic Japanese series Final Fantasy. And that's where this idea began. And ultimately, it's just one of those ideas that was never going to be achieved at Ubisoft. Like he said, he would have had to build his way up 25 years. And even by that point, who knows where Ubisoft will stand at that point in time. But furthermore, it's also the fact that the talent that they brought in, it wasn't like they brought in, massive successful developer from Sony, Santa Monica, Naughty Dog, Rockstar. No, this was a development team led by himself and a couple of other seniors, but mostly it was just a bunch of juniors that really were ambitious and wanted to make their stamp on this industry. So 5 years ago, he started to recruit people for this passion project of Expedition 33, firing out messages on Reddit and online forums. And one of those who responded was Jennifer Svedberg Yen, who was under lockdown in Australia at the time because of COVID. I saw a post on Reddit by Gim asking for voice actors to record something for free for a demo. I was like, I've never done that, sounds kind of cool, so I sent him an audition. Yes, the lead writer of Expedition 33 originally wasn't even applying for anything to do with writing. They were actually just applying to voice some of the characters in the game. Jennifer was originally cast as a major character in an early version of the game, but eventually switched roles to become the team's lead writer. This is talent that wouldn't have been touched if she hadn't, joined Sandfall Interactive, this small startup company. And then even furthermore, the music, that is probably one of the most notable things about this. You're going to hear it later on this year at the Game Awards, but composer Lorien Testard, who had never worked on a video game before, he was discovered via posts on music sharing website SoundCloud. Again, the fact that all of this came together, this isn't going to happen at a AAA studio. This is only going to happen in this form, a form that really does need to continue, hopefully with many more startup studios like this coming in the future. But Kepler Interactive, the main publisher behind Sandfall Interactive that helped fund it, again, this wasn't like this massive $20-30 million game. It seems like it may have been even less than that, but Kepler has explained their mission with Sandfall Interactive, and it perfectly exemplifies the path forward for this industry. What Kepler definitely isn't doing is chasing trends. Hendren, who is an executive at Kepler, a portfolio director, says it's a dangerous strategy. He gives the example of Balatro imitators. If you're making something hot on the heels of that, by the time you get to market, there probably will be 150 other alternatives. And that's true. I mean, you look at the industry, Battle Royales was the hot thing for a minute. There was also the fact that hero shooters like Concord, and even this year we have Marathon late to the party with extraction shooters, and there really isn't an audience waiting for it. It just feels like chasing trends is one of those things that this industry just keeps on doing. But Sandfall's COO and producer Francois Merouz says the fact that the studio head Broche was deliberately avoiding chasing trends with Clair Obscur was what attracted him to join in the first place, and the end result is one of the best games I think in the last couple of years. The game has had success to an extent that we didn't imagine. We smashed our forecast pretty fast. And then he continued, plus the team has grown up. Again, those juniors, this small team of 30 to 60 developers, they have that experience. They're only going to continue that with new entries into the future. This team has grown up, has acquired new skills throughout the production. Many of them were juniors when we started. We learned to work work together. So I can't wait to get to the next project because we'll start from a more efficient position than we started the company 5 years ago, and that comes with higher expectations as well. So it will be challenging, but I can say that we have, and the studio head in particular has great ideas for the next game. And then on the note of this representing a AA comeback, some people predicted us that it was a tricky sector when we started development and there could be kind of a curse on AA games. But from our perspective, we didn't care too much about market considerations. In a sense, of Plague Tale or Mortar Shell or Hellblade, games like those were already proof for us that small teams of less than 50 people could have great games and great execution. And I think the big thing about Expedition 33 is just the fact that we haven't seen many development teams taking that chance, that effort. And the fact that we now have this as an example, I think a lot within the industry, like Shuhei Yoshida are bringing up, it represents a path forward. And we need more of that. We truly do. It does continue. He says that, I think that the creative engine for the game was that a group of 30, in terms of what the game is, the vision of it, and the way it is in which it's executed, does come from that nucleus of staff that is Sandfall. In terms of main credits over the 4 years of production, we were on average about 30 people. We started with less than 10 people, scaled up until 30 and close to 40, and then scaled a little bit down. You mentioned Korean animators, but it's important to mention that none of them were full-time. They were doing some extras besides some other jobs of animation, so the core team was on average 30 people in the home studio plus privileged contractors like the lead writer or the composer, for example. I include them in that core team. There's been a lot of questions and controversy in regards to, how massive this team actually was, but the core team was around 30 developers. They had about a 30 or so that were outsourced, they helped out with some of the QA and stuff like that, but the core team at Sandfall Interactive was 30. That is the team that made this game. Now, Kepler's portfolio director continued saying the more useful thing that was being said was that this is not a AAA game, right? You can look at the credits and it's definitely not a AAA game. Well, yeah, because if you look at the Dragon Age, the Veilguard credits, those things extend for like an hour, I feel like, and then you look at Expedition 33, it's like maybe 2 minutes. These kind of games did exist in much greater numbers about 15 years ago, and I think there are some threads that the AAA industry lost as they grew and grew and grew, and brought in different ways of monetizing. We have to remember that there was a time when AAA companies were making games like Vanquish and Mirror's Edge and Kane and Lynch, and all these really cool, interesting, not small games, but much smaller scale games. And you've seen the number of releases from AAA publishers dwindle and dwindle and dwindle, and development cycles lengthening for forever, it feels like, with some of these projects. Like I said, 9-10 years is not unheard of with a lot of these projects these days. Now there's an opportunity for teams like Sandfall to come in and give players something that they really have not been given for quite a long time. And if Clair Obscur can be classed as a AAA game, how much did it cost exactly? And nobody's really saying specifically, but they have pretty much said that. I would say that I've seen a lot of budget estimations that are all higher than the real budget. Everyone's desperate to know what the budget is, and I won't tell them, but I would guarantee if you got 10 people to guess, I think 10 wouldn't guess the actual figure. He says, I'm sure Mirror's Edge and Vanquish cost more, put it that way. This game probably cost about 10 to 20 million tops, and that's honestly astonishing in an industry when you have games like Call of Duty, Black Ops Cold War, which leaked, and the development for that was like $800 million. And even Spider-Man 2, that was $300 million. The budgets within this industry are truly insane, and they're getting more and more insane by the day. And that's why a game like this, budget-friendly entry like this, it represents something very, very different than the AAA games industry. And you constantly hear about games are unaffordable, the prices have to increase. No, they don't. You just need smarter development teams and AAA publishers that actually are being mindful of all this, but a lot of them they don't care. Now, fortunately, Sandfall Interactive, Expedition 33's development team, they're sticking to how they've been running. They're not going to massively expand. They want to keep how they are. Their structure needs to stay the same, and I think that is really core to this team being successful. When you look at a Ubisoft, when you look at a Bethesda and BioWare, one of the big issues is the fact that there's so many different studios. They're all operating all around the world. Getting these teams to interact, getting approval for just, simple objects to be moved around, it's a headache, it's a hassle. And that's why having just one team, having this 50 or so developers all working together in one studio, that is a massive, massive advantage for them. For now, our vision would be to stick to a close team working in the same city with less than 50 people on board, focusing on one project after another and keeping this agility and this creative strength and smartness of a small group of passionate people wanting to do something big. That's how video games were made for years. The team that made Ocarina of Time or Half-Life 2, I think those were max 60 or 70 people. And that kind of size allows for good decisions and good creativity. He adds that the studio might recruit a few more people, but it won't start working on multiple projects simultaneously, and they will deliberately avoid growing too big and unwieldy. We want to keep the organization that made us successful, and that is music to my ears. I think keeping a core team to hold the vision and to build out what the game is, and then expanding as you need to work through things like outsourcing is a very smart and sustainable way to manage game development. I think there's been a lot of irresponsible practices in this industry. He continues referring to the inherent risks involved in ballooning AAA budgets and team sizes. Some games make it work. Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to make it work. I think we can all say with great confidence. But there are plenty of games made with very large teams and for huge amounts of money that don't land. And there is a human cost to running things that way. People lose their jobs. God knows how many layoffs there's been in this industry over the last few years. And yeah, it's been in the dozens of thousands of jobs lost. I do see a lot of developers who ship a game and then get some level of success, even very small levels of success on a very small budgets, and then almost instinctively feel like they need to double or triple the budget of their next game, and that is something I definitely question. One of the things that's great about Expedition 33 is it really respects the player's time. It gives them plenty to do and gives them plenty of satisfaction, but it isn't arbitrarily 500 hours of gameplay. It's impactful because it's scoped correctly. It doesn't have any sense of bloat or extraneous things that are put there just to make it larger and larger and larger. The value that players get from games does not align systemically with the length of the game, which is absolutely true. And Expedition 33, in terms of its structure, in terms of its organization, that is the path forward. In terms of its $50 price tag, it too is a trendsetter. Reasonably scoped game comes with a reasonable price, the antithesis to the AAA industry that is charged more than ever for what feels like often less quality content than before. The perception of a less than $60, $70 game like this has been to fear that you're getting a short or less quality experience or something that's unfinished. Expedition 33 breaks that narrative, and having a game like this represent of why everything doesn't need to be $80 or so and loaded with microtransactions, it's a great thing. It also is just awesome to have a modern experience like this where you can earn and find all kinds of cool cosmetics outfits by just exploring and completing tasks, not staring at an overpriced in-game store. It doesn't happen as often these days, but that's just one specific thing I really appreciate when it happens. In terms of its content and overall quality, this is an experience that's going to win tons of awards later on this year. And look, I've really been disgusted by a lot of the RPGs the last couple of years, and even questioned if I enjoy these games anymore, just because of the stagnation and creativity from so many of these studios that I used to look up to. You look at a game like Dragon Age the Veilguard, fans of the franchise, people who stuck around through the ups and downs, got a game that barely resembled the dark, political, mature RPGs of the series that was what this used to be known for. The art direction leaned heavily into bright, exaggerated animation. The tone felt lighter, more casual, more sanitized. And while the combat was serviceable, it lacked the strategic depth that used to define Dragon Age. And even David Gator, he weighed in early on, saying that the tone was different. This was a different experience. But the game's post-release discussion wasn't revolved around its story or mechanics, but about how alienating it felt to the core fan base. And then there's Starfield from Bethesda Game Studios, their first new IP in 25 years, marketed as a space epic with over 1,000 planets to explore, but what we got was a lifeless, systems-heavy game with no soul. Instead of meaningful exploration, we got loading screens and randomized content spread across copy and pasted locations. Todd Howard even admitted post-launch that, yeah, maybe the 1,000 planets thing was misunderstood by the gaming audience, and it was. Players didn't want procedural bloat. They wanted handcrafted depth. Starfield lacked direction because it was trying to be too much for too many people and ended up really saying nothing. And then another example, Saints Row the Remake in 2022, Volition tried to reboot the franchise by cutting everything that made it what it was. Gone was the absurd, over-the-top charm, and its plays bland open-world filler, cringe writing, and a cast of characters that felt like they were built off a marketing demographic chart. Critics panned it, fans abandoned it, and Embracer Group later shut the studio down. A tragic but predictable outcome when your game is built on trying not to offend anyone while also trying to appeal to everyone. And then even this year, we've had Assassin's Creed Shadows. It leaned into its open-world RPG bloat. Don't even need to get into that one. Then there's Avowed from Obsidian Entertainment, originally revealed as their own Skyrim, and it faded into the wind with boredom with a limited scope and confusing narrative design choices. The RPG genre, especially from the AAA games industry, has been a giant disappointment, and that's why when you have surprise hits like Sandfall Interactive's Expedition 33, I think it really is important to examine what the game is doing and how it's being made, because I think it does represent something that really needs to change in the AAA games industry, and I don't think we're going to see see that from the likes of Electronic Arts, Activision, Blizzard, Take-Two Interactive, Ubisoft, and so on and so forth. The change that is going to happen is we're just going to continue to hopefully see more smaller studios like Sandfall Interactive taking off. And honestly, that's a positive for this industry. In more ways than one, Expedition 33 is a triumph and a message to an industry that is spiraling out of control. A surrealist fantasy RPG with turn-based combat and some of the best music I've ever heard. And it goes all in on that. The developers weren't chasing trends, they weren't trying to rewrite genre expectations with buzzwords. They just made a good game, a focused, confident, and artistically bold experience. Ubisoft can't do this anymore. Neither can most of the big players. They're too bloated, too risk-adverse, and too dependent on live service hooks, microtransactions, and checkbox features. Even when Ubisoft does something seemingly fresh, it often feels like it was designed in a vacuum. Skull and Bones is a great example. No identity, no soul. It's another mechanical exercise built for retention metrics, not artistic expression. And that's the core of the problem. AAA games used to be the bleeding edge. Now they're mostly safe bets, made for shareholders, not players. Developers have extensively gone on the record talking about how stifling these environments are, and David Gator's comments that we went over earlier on the video are a great example of that. Expedition 33 didn't do that though. It was made by a team with something to prove. You feel it in every mechanic, every frame of animation, every melancholic story beat. It doesn't apologize for being weird, it doesn't try to appeal to a TikTok or modern audience, it respects that gamers can handle nuance, darkness, and challenge. That alone sets it apart here in 2025. 3.3 million copies sold in about a month, rave reviews, and most importantly, players talking about it the way people used to talk about classic RPGs, discussing themes, dissecting mechanics, making fan art and videos, because the game actually gave them something to care about. AAA publishers need to take the hint. Games like Expedition 33 shouldn't be exceptions, but as long as the industry keeps chasing trends instead of chasing meaning, it will be. And the more they fumble, the more the smaller studios will rise, and deservedly so. Anyway, what do you make of Expedition 33 and the state of the AAA games industry? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or if you found any informative value. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.